I was halfway through my morning coffee when I glanced out the kitchen window and saw the white Honda Civic rolling down my driveway again, the third time this week. And that was when something finally clicked in my brain that this was not normal neighbor behavior. My name is Grant Emerson, and I had bought this house in Scottsdale, Arizona about 8 months ago. It was a nice 3-bedroom ranch-style home in the Saguaro Ridge community. One of those planned developments where everything looked almost identical, except for the paint colors and the occasional desert landscaping variation. The previous owner had mentioned the HOA was active, but nothing I could not handle. I had dealt with homeowner associations before at my rental properties, so I figured I knew what to expect. What I did not expect was to become an unauthorized parking lot. The driveway situation started subtly. I would come home from work and notice tire marks that were not from my truck. Sometimes there would be a car parked there when I pulled up, and the driver would wave apologetically and move. I figured maybe they were confused about which house was theirs, or maybe they were visiting a neighbor and got the address wrong. Scottsdale had plenty of transplants who were still learning their way around. But this particular morning, watching that Honda reverse down my driveway after clearly spending the night there based on the frost patterns on the windshield, I decided enough was enough. I grabbed my phone and took a photo, then watched as the car drove 2 houses down and pulled into the driveway of the corner lot. That was when the pieces started connecting. That corner house was where the HOA meetings were held. I had been to exactly 1 meeting since moving in, long enough to realize it was run by a woman named Patricia Morrison, who treated the neighborhood covenants like they were constitutional amendments. She was maybe 50 years old with that specific haircut that seemed to be issued along with HOA board positions. Blonde with aggressive highlights, always wearing athleisure where that looked expensive but uncomfortable. I had not thought much about Patricia since that first meeting where she had spent 40 minutes discussing the acceptable shade range for beige exterior paint. But now, I was wondering if there was a connection between the HOA office location and the mysterious driveway usage. I decided to do some reconnaissance. Over the next week, I started keeping a log. Every time I saw a vehicle in my driveway, I noted the time, took a photo, and tracked where it went afterward. The pattern became obvious fast. Between the hours of 9 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon, at least 3 different cars were using my driveway as overflow parking for HOA business. The white Honda belonged to Patricia herself. There was also a silver Lexus that I learned belonged to the HOA treasurer, a guy named Kenneth something, and a red Toyota that seemed to be used by various people who had business with the HOA. By the end of that week, I had documented 17 separate instances of unauthorized parking. 17 times someone had used my private property without asking, without permission, without even a courtesy heads up. I was not the kind of guy who enjoyed confrontation, but I also was not the kind to let people walk all over me. I had worked construction for 15 years before transitioning into property management, and I had learned that setting boundaries early saved everyone headaches later. So, I decided to approach this diplomatically first. On a Tuesday morning, I walked down to Patricia's house and rang the doorbell. She answered wearing purple yoga pants and a matching jacket, holding a protein shake that probably cost more than my lunch. "Grant, right?" she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "What can I do for you?" "Hey, Patricia, I wanted to talk to you about something. I have noticed there are cars using my driveway pretty regularly, and I think they might be associated with HOA business." Her expression did not change, which somehow made it worse. "Oh, yes. Since we use my home as the HOA office, and my driveway only fits 2 cars. We have been using the overflow space. Your driveway has that nice wide entry, and you are usually at work during business hours, so it works out perfectly. I blinked. Right, but nobody asked me if that was okay. Well, it is for HOA business, she said, as if that explained everything. We are all part of the community. Supporting the HOA is supporting property values. I understand that, but it is still my driveway, my property. Patricia's smile tightened. Grant, I do not think you understand how HOAs work. When you bought your home, you agreed to certain community standards and cooperative living arrangements. The CC and Articus are very clear about supporting community operations. I read the CC and Articus, I said, which was partially true. I had skimmed them. I do not remember anything about providing free parking. It is implied in the Community Support Clause, she said. Section 12, subsection 4. But honestly, Grant, I am surprised you are making an issue of this. It is not like you are even home during the day. Nobody is blocking you from anything. That logic was so backward it took me a second to formulate a response. That does not matter. It is my property. You cannot just use someone's property without permission. I think you are overreacting, Patricia said, her tone shifting from friendly to icy. But if you are going to be difficult about it, I will bring it up at the next board meeting. We meet Thursday evening. You should come. She closed the door before I could respond. I stood there on her welcome mat, which ironically said something about hospitality, and realized I had just made an enemy of the HOA president. In hindsight, maybe I should have started with a friendly note or an email. But also, in hindsight, maybe she should have asked before commandeering my driveway for 8 months. Thursday evening came, and I showed up to the HOA meeting with a folder containing all my documentation. The meeting was held in Patricia's oversized living room, which had been arranged with folding chairs facing a table where Patricia sat with 2 other board members. About 15 homeowners were scattered around the room, most of them looking like they would rather be anywhere else. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through the usual business. There was discussion about the community pool needing resurfacing, debate about whether Christmas lights could stay up past January 15th, and a heated argument about someone's dog barking at 6 in the morning. I waded through all of it, my folder getting heavier in my lap. Finally, Patricia said, "New business. Grant Emerson has raised a concern about parking. Grant, would you like to address the board?" I stood up, suddenly aware that everyone was looking at me. "Yeah, thanks." So I have been documenting that multiple vehicles associated with HOA business have been using my driveway without my permission. Over the past 2 weeks, I have recorded 17 instances. I held up my folder. I have photos, times, dates, and license plates. One of the other homeowners, an older guy I did not know, snorted. "You have been stalking cars." "I have been documenting unauthorized use of my property," I corrected. Patricia folded her hands on the table. "Grant, as I explained when we spoke, this is part of community operations. The HOA office is located at my residence, and overflow parking is necessary for conducting community business. Your driveway is the most conveniently located for this purpose." "But you never asked me," I said. "You never got my permission." The CC and Articus provide for reasonable use of community resources in support of HOA operations, Patricia said. She pulled out a binder and flipped to a marked page. Section 12, subsection 4 states that homeowners agree to support community operations and infrastructure as needed for the benefit of all residents. That is talking about supporting the HOA financially through dues, I said. It does not say anything about giving up property rights. Kenneth, the treasurer, leaned forward. He was a thin guy with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of someone who had never been told no. Actually, the language is deliberately broad to allow for flexibility in operations. We could interpret it to include various forms of support. You could interpret it that way, I said, but that does not make it legal. I looked it up. In Arizona, property rights are pretty clear. You cannot use someone's private property without permission, HOA or not. Patricia's expression hardened. Grant, I am trying to be patient with you because you are new to the community. But you need to understand that being part of an HOA means making certain sacrifices for the greater good. If everyone was as selfish as you are being right now, we could not function as a community. Selfish. The word came out sharper than I intended. I am asking you to not use my property without permission. That is not selfish. That is basic property rights. Maybe you should have thought about that before buying in an HOA community. Someone else chimed in. The meeting was deteriorating fast. I could feel the room turning against me, which was insane because I was literally just asking people to not park on my property without asking. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice level, I am not trying to be difficult. I am just asking that you ask. Get my permission. Set up some kind of formal agreement. You cannot just take something because it is convenient. Patricia closed her binder with a sharp snap. The board will take your concerns under consideration. We will review the CC and Articus with our attorney and provide a response within 30 days as required by our bylaws. In the meantime, I suggest you think carefully about what kind of neighbor you want to be. This community works because we work together. The implied threat was clear. I gathered my folder and left, pretty sure I had just painted a target on my back. Over the next few days, nothing changed. Cars kept parking in my driveway. The white Honda was there when I left for work. The silver Lexus was there when I came home for lunch. It was like my objection had not even registered. On Monday, I found a notice on my door. It was from the HOA, citing me for violation of community standards. Apparently, my garbage cans were visible from the street, which was a violation of Section 8, subsection 2. Never mind that everyone on my street left their cans out on the same schedule. Never mind that I had been doing the same thing for 8 months without issue. Tuesday brought another notice. My front yard landscaping was not up to community standards. Specifically, I had some bare patches in my grass that needed to be addressed within 14 days, or I would face fines. Wednesday, I got a notice about my porch light being the wrong color temperature. Apparently, warm white was acceptable, but I had cool white, which created an inconsistent aesthetic. It was retaliation, pure and simple. Patricia was hitting me with every petty violation she could find to punish me for questioning her authority. I called a lawyer on Thursday. His name was Robert Chen, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Scottsdale, in one of those modern buildings with too much glass and aggressive air conditioning. So let me get this straight, Robert said after I explained the situation. The HOA has been using your driveway for parking without permission for months. You asked them to stop, and now they are retaliating with violation notices. That is exactly what is happening, I said. Robert leaned back in his chair. Okay, the good news is you are absolutely right. They cannot use your property without permission. The CC and Articus might give them authority to regulate certain things, but they cannot just claim your driveway as community parking. That is not how property rights work in Arizona. That is what I thought. The bad news is that fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. They have a legal fund built into everyone's dues, which means they can afford to drag this out. You would be paying out of pocket. I had expected this. What are my options? you could send a cease and desist letter. That is the cheapest option. It formally notifies them that they are trespassing and need to stop. If they ignore it, you could pursue legal action. And if I pursue legal action, you could sue for trespassing and harassment. The retaliation with the violation notices actually strengthens your case. Arizona courts do not look kindly on HOAs that abuse their authority, but we are talking months of litigation and thousands in legal fees. I thought about my savings account. I had been careful with money, but a legal battle would hurt. What about the violation notices they are sending me? Fight every single one. Request hearings, make them prove their case. Most of these sound bogus or selectively enforced, which is illegal. An HOA has to enforce rules uniformly. If they are targeting you specifically, that is actionable. I left Robert's office with a plan and a retainer agreement. He would draft a cease and desist letter, and I would start documenting everything even more carefully than before. Every violation notice, every instance of parking, every interaction with the HOA would be recorded. The cease and desist letter was delivered the following Monday. I was not there to see Patricia's reaction, but I imagined it was not pleasant. That afternoon I got a call from Kenneth, the treasurer. "Grant, this is Kenneth Morrison from the HOA board. We received a letter from your attorney." "Yeah, I figured you would. Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Patricia can be a bit intense, but she really does have the community's best interests at heart. Maybe we can work something out without getting lawyers involved." "I am listening," I said. "What if we paid you for parking? Like a rental agreement. $50 a month. $50 a month to use my driveway all day, every weekday," I said. "That is not even close to market rate. Commercial parking in Scottsdale goes for at least $5 an hour." "That is downtown parking," Kenneth said. "This is residential. It is also my property that you have been using without permission for 8 months. You owe me back rent." There was silence on the line. "Back rent? 8 months of parking, multiple cars, weekday use. Yeah, back rent. By my calculation, based on conservative estimates of usage, you owe me around $3,000. Kenneth laughed, but it sounded forced. "That is ridiculous. We have been providing a service to the community. Then provide it on community property or ask permission first. Those are your options. Grant, you are being unreasonable." "No, I am being reasonable. You are the ones who used my property without asking and are now trying to lowball me into accepting it retroactively." Kenneth hung up. The retaliation intensified. Over the next week, I received violation notices for things I did not even know could be violations. My mailbox post was apparently 3 inches too far from the curb. My house numbers were not the approved font. I had a garden hose visible from the street, which violated the aesthetic standards clause. Each notice came with a threat of fines starting at $100 and escalating to $250 for continued non-compliance. The deadlines were aggressive, usually giving me only 7 days to remedy each violation or request a hearing. I requested hearings for all of them. The hearings were scheduled back-to-back on a Tuesday evening. I showed up with Robert Chen and a briefcase full of documentation. The board sat at their table looking like they were about to sentence me to hard labor. Patricia started with the mailbox violation. "Mr. Emerson, our inspection revealed that your mailbox post is positioned 39 inches from the curb edge. Community standards require 36 inches. Do you dispute this measurement?" "I dispute the validity of this citation," Robert said. "My client has measured multiple mailbox posts in the neighborhood. We have documented at least 12 that vary from the alleged standard, ranging from 33 to 42 inches from the curb." Selective enforcement of HOA rules is prohibited under Arizona law. Patricia's jaw tightened. Those will be addressed in due course. Will they? Robert pulled out a folder. Because according to our research, many of those mailboxes have been in place for years without citation. Including your own, Mrs. Morrison, which is positioned at 41 inches from the curb. The room got very quiet. Kenneth cleared his throat. Let us move on to the next issue. The house number font. This went on for 2 hours. Every violation they brought up, Robert countered with evidence of selective enforcement or arbitrary standards. The garden hose. 14 neighbors had visible hoses. The light fixture. Half the street had cool white bulbs. The grass patches. The community had no formal standard for lawn coverage, and multiple homes had similar or worse conditions. By the end, Patricia looked like she wanted to throw her binder at my head. Fine. The citations are dismissed pending a review of community-wide compliance. But the parking issue remains unresolved. Actually, Robert said, the parking issue is very resolved. Your use of my client's property without permission constitutes trespassing. The cease and desist letter made that clear. If you continue to use his driveway, we will pursue legal action. We have been using it for community business, Patricia said. That is hardly trespassing. Trespassing does not require criminal intent, Robert said. It just requires unauthorized entry onto private property. You do not have authorization. Therefore, it is trespassing. We will get an injunction, Patricia said. On what grounds? Robert asked. You are going to ask a judge to force a homeowner to let you park on his property without compensation. Good luck with that. Patricia stood up. This meeting is adjourned. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. I figured they would find somewhere else to park, maybe rent a space, maybe limit their office hours. I figured they would back down. I was wrong. 2 days later, I came home to find a bright orange boot on my truck. You know, the kind that police put on vehicles to prevent them from being driven. Attached to my windshield was a notice stating that my vehicle was parked in violation of community standards and had been immobilized pending payment of outstanding fines. I called Robert immediately. They booted my truck on my own property in my own driveway. They what? There is a boot on my truck and a notice saying I have outstanding fines, but I do not have any outstanding fines. The violations were all dismissed. That is illegal, Robert said. That is theft, conversion, and about 5 other things. Do not try to remove it yourself. Take photos of everything and call the police. I called the Scottsdale Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher sounded confused but said she would send an officer. Officer Ramirez showed up about 20 minutes later. He was a younger guy, probably early 30s, with the patient expression of someone who dealt with neighborhood disputes regularly. So you came home and found this on your vehicle? He asked, examining the boot. Yeah. I have been in a dispute with my HOA about them using my driveway without permission. They have been retaliating with fake violations. My lawyer got them all dismissed, and now this. Officer Ramirez took photos and wrote down the information from the notice. You know who put this here? Had to be the HOA. They are the ones claiming I have fines. Okay, here is the thing. In Arizona, only law enforcement or authorized towing companies can immobilize vehicles. If your HOA did this without legal authority, that is illegal, but I need to verify the situation first. He walked down to Patricia's house. I waited by my truck, watching neighbors start to gather and whisper. Nothing like a police car in the driveway to get the community talking. Officer Ramirez returned with Patricia, who was wearing a tennis outfit and looking highly annoyed. Officer, this is a community standards enforcement action. We are well within our rights. Madam, Do you have legal authority to immobilize vehicles? Officer Ramirez asked. We have a contract with a towing company that provides enforcement services, Patricia said. I am going to need to see that contract and their business license, Officer Ramirez said. Because in Arizona, vehicle immobilization requires specific authorization. Patricia's confidence wavered. I will have to get that information from our management company. You do that. In the meantime, this vehicle is on private property belonging to Mr. Emerson. Unless you can show me legal authorization right now, I am going to require you to remove the boot. I do not have the key, Patricia said. Then call whoever does. It took an hour. Patricia made phone calls, getting increasingly agitated. Finally, a guy in a pickup truck showed up with tools and removed the boot. Officer Ramirez took his information and told him that the police would be investigating whether the company had proper authorization to operate in Scottsdale. After everyone left, Officer Ramirez gave me a case number. I would recommend documenting everything. This sounds like it is escalating and your HOA seems pretty determined. If they try anything else like this, call us immediately. I thanked him and went inside, my hands shaking from adrenaline. This had gone from annoying to genuinely concerning. Patricia was not backing down. She was doubling down. Robert filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs in the state. He also sent another letter to the HOA, this time detailing every instance of harassment and threatening further legal action if they did not cease immediately. For about a week, things were quiet. No violation notices, no boots, no cars in my driveway. I started to hope that maybe they had finally gotten the message. Then I got the special assessment notice. It arrived via certified mail, which should have been my first warning. The letter informed me that the HOA board had voted to implement a special assessment of $5,000 per household to fund emergency infrastructure repairs. Payment was due within 30 days, $5,000. I called 3 of my neighbors. None of them had received special assessment notices. I called Robert. They are trying to force me out. They hit me with a $5,000 assessment that nobody else got. That is blatantly illegal, Robert said. Special assessments have to be applied uniformly to all homeowners. Targeting one person is discrimination and harassment. We need to escalate this. Escalate how? File a lawsuit. We have more than enough evidence now for harassment, trespassing, selective enforcement, and discriminatory practices. This assessment is just the final straw. I thought about the cost, the time, the stress. I thought about backing down and just letting them use the damn driveway. It would be easier. But then I thought about what that would mean. It would mean Patricia and her board could do whatever they wanted to anyone in the neighborhood. It would mean property rights did not matter. It would mean bullies won. Let us do it, I said. File the lawsuit. Robert filed in Maricopa County Superior Court. The complaint was 30 pages long and detailed every instance of harassment, trespassing, retaliation, and abuse of authority. We sued the HOA as an entity and Patricia Morrison, personally for her role in the harassment campaign. The lawsuit made the local news. Apparently, homeowner sues HOA over driveway dispute was interesting enough for a human interest segment on the Phoenix Evening News. A reporter named Jennifer Sanchez called me for an interview. I met her at a coffee shop in Old Town Scottsdale. She was professional and thorough, asking about the timeline, the documentation, and what I hoped to achieve. Why not just let them park there? She asked. I mean, if you are not home during the day anyway. Because it is my property, I said. And because they never asked. If they had come to me 8 months ago and said, hey, we need overflow parking, can we work something out? maybe we could have figured it out. But they just took it and then acted like I was the problem for objecting. What do you want to happen? I want them to follow the law. I want them to respect property rights. And I want them to stop harassing me for standing up for myself. The segment aired 2 days later. It was fair and balanced, showing my side and getting a comment from Patricia, who said something about community cooperation and difficult neighbors. But the coverage shifted something. I started getting emails and calls from other people in Scazzaro Ridge and neighboring HOAs, sharing their own stories of abuse and overreach. One woman named Sandra told me the HOA had fined her $3,000 for painting her front door teal instead of the approved sage green, even though the paint sample she used came from the approved palette. A guy named Marcus said they forced him to remove solar panels that were saving him hundreds on electricity because they were not aesthetically consistent. An elderly couple, the Hendersons, had been fined repeatedly for having a vegetable garden in their backyard, which someone on the board decided violated the ornamental landscaping requirement. The lawsuit moved slowly, which was apparently normal for civil litigation. There were motions and responses and discovery requests. Robert kept me updated, explaining each step. The HOA hired a law firm from Phoenix, expensive attorneys who specialized in defending HOAs. They filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the CC and Artiques gave them broad authority and that I had failed to exhaust internal remedies. Robert countered that internal remedies were futile given the obvious retaliation, and that the trespassing and harassment were outside the scope of HOA authority anyway. The judge denied the motion to dismiss, which Robert said was a good sign. During discovery, we got access to HOA records. That was when things got really interesting. The financial records showed that Patricia had been paying herself a salary as HOA president, not a huge amount, but $1,500 a month for administrative services. There was no authorization for this in the bylaws. The bylaws clearly stated that board positions were voluntary. Kenneth, the treasurer, had been funneling landscaping contracts to his brother's company at rates significantly above market value. Over 3 years, the HOA had paid over $100,000 to this company for services that should have cost maybe $60,000. There were other irregularities too. Missing receipts, vague expense categories, and payments to vendors that Robert's investigator could not verify actually existed. They have been embezzling, Robert said when we reviewed the findings, or at minimum, engaging in serious self-dealing. This changes everything. How? Because now it is not just about your driveway. It is about fiduciary duty and possibly criminal fraud. We need to report this to the Arizona Department of Real Estate and possibly the Attorney General. We filed complaints with both agencies, attaching the financial documentation. Robert also amended our lawsuit to include allegations of financial mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. Patricia's response was to call an emergency HOA meeting and attempt to have me removed from the community. I am not even sure how she thought that was possible, but she apparently found some obscure clause about removing homeowners who engaged in conduct detrimental to the community. The meeting was packed. Word had spread about the lawsuit and the financial irregularities. At least 40 homeowners showed up, way more than the usual 15. Sandra was there, and Marcus, and the Hendersons. There were people I had never met who introduced themselves and said they supported what I was doing. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately moved to the agenda item about my removal. Emerson has engaged in a campaign of harassment against this board, and has made false and defamatory allegations that have damaged the reputation of our community. The board moves to exercise our authority under Section 18 to remove him as a homeowner and force the sale of his property." "You cannot do that," someone shouted. "Yeah, that is insane," someone else added. Patricia banged her gavel, which was ridiculous because it was an HOA meeting, not a courtroom. "Order! The board has the authority to protect the community from disruptive elements." I stood up. "Patricia, you have been stealing from the community. You have been paying yourself a salary without authorization. Kenneth has been directing contracts to his family. You have been using my property without permission and retaliating when I objected. And now you want to kick me out for exposing it." "Those are lies," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I have the financial records," I said. "Discovery in the lawsuit gave us access to everything. Bank statements, contracts, canceled checks. It is all documented." The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once, demanding answers. Kenneth tried to defend the landscaping contracts, saying his brother's company did quality work. Patricia insisted that her administrative salary was reasonable compensation for her time. Sandra stood up. "I move for a vote of no confidence in the current board. Everything they have done has been questionable at best and illegal at worst. We need new leadership." "Seconded," Marcus called out. Patricia tried to shut it down, but the meeting had gotten away from her. Someone called for a formal vote. The bylaws required that such votes happen at properly noticed meetings with a quorum present, and technically, we had both. Patricia fought it, but ultimately had no choice. The vote was not even close. Out of 40 homeowners present, 38 voted to remove the current board. Only Patricia and Kenneth voted to keep themselves in power. A new interim board was elected on the spot. Sandra became president, Marcus took over as treasurer, and 2 other homeowners I did not know well filled the remaining positions. Their first act was to suspend Patricia's administrative salary and launch an independent audit of HOA finances. I left that meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. The lawsuit was still ongoing, but at least the community had taken back control from Patricia and her cronies. The independent audit took 6 weeks and confirmed everything we had found and then some. Patricia had taken approximately $30,000 in unauthorized salary over 2 years. Kenneth's brother's company had overcharged by at least $40,000. There were also unexplained cash withdrawals totaling around $15,000 that nobody could account for. The total misappropriation was somewhere north of $80,000. Sandra, as the new president, filed a police report. White-collar crime was not the Scottsdale Police Department's most urgent priority, but embezzlement from an HOA was still embezzlement. Detective Laura Hayes was assigned to the case. Detective Hayes was thorough. She interviewed board members, reviewed financial documents, and traced money flows. She discovered that Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including a vacation to Hawaii that she had coded as a conference expense, despite there being no conference. Kenneth's situation was more complicated because technically, his brother's company did do work, just at inflated prices. But the detective found emails showing that Kenneth had steered contracts without competitive bidding and had received kickbacks in the form of cash payments. About 4 months after the initial complaint, Detective Hayes arrested both Patricia Morrison and Kenneth Morrison. Yes, as it turned out, they were married, which explained a lot about how they had coordinated the scheme. They were charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The arrest made the news again. Jennifer Sanchez did a follow-up story connecting it to the original driveway dispute, and showing how that one incident had unraveled a years-long embezzlement scheme. My lawsuit was still moving forward, but with Patricia facing criminal charges, her defense collapsed. The HOA's insurance company, which was covering the legal defense, decided to settle. They offered $20,000 to cover my legal fees, compensation for the harassment, and the back rent for the driveway usage. Robert negotiated them up to $28,000. I accepted. Patricia and Kenneth's criminal case took longer. They hired a defense attorney who tried to argue that the financial irregularities were accounting errors, not intentional theft. But the prosecution had emails, recorded phone calls from Kenneth discussing kickbacks, and documentation of Patricia's personal expenses charged to the HOA. About 8 months after their arrest, they both accepted plea deals. Patricia pled guilty to theft and fraud, receiving 3 years of probation, restitution of $30,000, and 500 hours of community service. Kenneth got a similar deal, but with restitution of $40,000. The restitution payments went back to the HOA, which used the money to repave the community pool area and update the landscaping at the entrance. Sandra and the new board also rewrote the CC and Artiques to add clear oversight mechanisms and prevent future abuse. As for my driveway, nobody ever parked there again without asking. The new HOA board rented a small office space in a commercial plaza for official business, which cost about $300 a month, and was funded through existing dues without any special assessments. I stayed in touch with Sandra and several of the other homeowners who had been dealing with their own HOA issues. We formed a sort of informal support network for people dealing with abusive community associations. I even testified at the Arizona State Legislature when they were considering reforms to HOA oversight laws. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, even when it is easier not to. When I first noticed cars in my driveway, I could have ignored it. When Patricia pushed back, I could have backed down. When the retaliation started, I could have moved, but property rights matter, community rules matter, and accountability matters even more. About a year after everything settled, I was doing yard work on a Saturday morning when a car pulled into my driveway. I looked up, ready to be annoyed, and saw it was my friend Mike from work. He had come by to help me install a new ceiling fan. "Sorry, should I have parked on the street?" he asked, noticing my expression. I laughed. "No, you are good. I just have a complicated relationship with my driveway." Mike looked confused, but he helped me with the ceiling fan, and afterward, we sat on my back patio drinking beer while I told him the whole story. He was appropriately amazed and appalled. "So they just started parking there without asking," he said. "Yep. And then tried to kick you out when you complained." "Yep. That is insane." "Welcome to HOA life," I said, but honestly, despite everything, I did not regret buying the house. Saguaro Ridge was actually a pretty nice community once you got rid of the corruption and abuse. The neighbors were mostly good people who just wanted to live their lives. The desert landscaping was beautiful, especially in spring when everything bloomed. And my house, with its 3 bedrooms and problematic driveway, was a good home. Patricia and Kenneth moved out of the neighborhood about 6 months after their convictions. Their house sold quickly, bought by a young family with 2 kids who immediately became active in community events in a normal, non-embezzling way. I ran into Patricia once at a grocery store in Scottsdale. We made eye contact across the produce section. She looked older, tired, and like she wanted to say something. But then she just turned and walked away. I let her go. There was nothing left to say. The lawsuit settlement money covered my legal bills with enough left over to redo my landscaping. I hired a company, not Kenneth's brother's company, to install drought-resistant native plants and a drip irrigation system. It looked great and used way less water than grass. I also put up a small sign at the end of my driveway. Nothing obnoxious, just a polite private driveway, no parking notice. I never needed to enforce it because, again, nobody tried to park there. But having it there made me feel better. The new HOA board under Sandra's leadership was actually functional. They enforced rules consistently and fairly. They communicated clearly about community issues. They managed finances responsibly and published quarterly reports so everyone could see where money was going. It turned out that an HOA could actually work when run by people who cared about the community more than their own power. I even volunteered to serve on a committee reviewing the architectural standards. We streamlined the rules, got rid of ridiculous requirements like specific house number fonts, and focused on genuine quality of life issues rather than aesthetic micromanagement. It was boring work but satisfying in a weird way. About 2 years after the initial driveway discovery, I was at a neighborhood barbecue when Sandra came up to me with a beer. "You know, none of this would have happened if you had just let them park there," she said with a grin. "Probably not," I agreed. "The community is better for it, though. Patricia and Kenneth would have kept stealing and bullying if you had not pushed back, so thank you." "I just wanted them to stop using my driveway," I said. "Yeah, but you stood up when most people would have backed down." "That matters." We clinked beer bottles and stood there watching kids play in the community pool while someone's dog ran around chasing a tennis ball. It was a perfect Arizona evening, warm but not hot, with that desert sky turning pink and orange as the sun set. My driveway drama had become neighborhood legend. New residents would hear the story and look at me with a mix of respect and amusement. "You are the driveway guy," they would say, and I would nod and confirm that yes, I was the driveway guy. Robert Chen and I stayed in touch. He sent me a nice bottle of whiskey when the criminal case concluded, and occasionally called when he had other clients dealing with HOA disputes. I became his go-to reference for, yes, fighting your HOA is possible and sometimes worth it. I also learned a lot about HOA law, more than I ever wanted to know honestly. I learned about CC and Articus and bylaws and fiduciary duties. I learned about selective enforcement and discriminatory practices. I learned that just because something is in a contract does not make it legal or enforceable. Most importantly, I learned that communities function best when power is checked and balanced. HOAs serve a legitimate purpose in maintaining property values and community standards. But they can also become petty dictatorships when the wrong people get control and nobody pushes back. The Arizona Department of Real Estate ended up using my case as part of their training materials for HOA board members. Apparently, I was now a cautionary tale in what not to do as an HOA. Robert found this hilarious and sent me a copy of the training document with the relevant sections highlighted. One of those sections was titled Respecting Property Rights and used my driveway situation as an example of overreach. Another section on avoiding retaliation detailed Patricia's campaign of bogus violations. There was even a section on financial management that used Kenneth's landscaping kickback scheme as a case study in corruption. I was strangely proud to be educational material, even in a do not do this context. The house itself became more than just a property to me. It was the place where I learned to stand up for myself in a new way. I had always been confident in my work, in my abilities, in my relationships. But standing up to an institution, to people with authority and community backing, that was different. It required a different kind of courage, My driveway, the source of all this chaos, got a lot of use for legitimate purposes. Friends came over for football games and parked there. My sister visited from Tucson and parked there. When I started dating someone, Lisa, she parked there and eventually started leaving a pair of shoes in my closet and a toothbrush in my bathroom. Lisa thought the whole HOA story was insane. They just started parking there, without asking. She said the first time I told her, echoing Mike's reaction from years before. Yep, I said, and you sued them. Well, I tried to handle it reasonably first. They made it a legal issue. That is either really brave or really stubborn, she said. Can it be both? She laughed and kissed me, and I decided that yes, it could definitely be both. Life moved on the way life does. The driveway dispute became the background story to other life events. I got a promotion at work. Lisa and I got serious. The neighborhood continued functioning under its new, non-corrupt leadership. Patricia's name became shorthand for cautionary tales, as in, do not be a Patricia about it. 3 years after everything started, I was sitting on my patio again, this time with Lisa, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. The desert had that early morning stillness that I loved, everything quiet except for birds and the occasional distant car. You ever regret it? Lisa asked. The whole fight, it sounds exhausting. I thought about it. The stress, the legal bills, the confrontations, the uncertainty. Then I thought about Sandra's community barbecues, the new playground equipment the HOA installed after recovering the stolen funds, the way neighbors actually talk to each other now instead of living in fear of violation notices. No, I said. I do not regret it. Good, Lisa said. Because I am not dating someone who lets people walk all over him. Even if it is just about a driveway, especially if it is just about a driveway, it is never just about a driveway. She was right. It was never just about the driveway. It was about respect, about rights, about standing up to bullies who abuse what little power they have. It was about the kind of community you want to live in and the kind of person you want to be. My driveway remained blessedly empty of unauthorized vehicles. The white Honda never returned. The silver Lexus was gone. The red Toyota was a distant memory. In their place were the vehicles of friends, family, and people who actually belonged there. Sometimes I would walk to the end of my driveway to get the mail and pause there, looking down at the concrete that had caused so much chaos. It was just a driveway, really. A strip of concrete wide enough for 2 cars leading from the street to my garage. Nothing special, nothing fancy, but it was mine. And that mattered. The neighborhood continued to thrive under the new board. Property values actually increased once word got out that the embezzlement scheme had been resolved, and the community was well managed again. Turns out, people preferred buying into HOAs that were not corrupt. Who knew? I eventually became friends with some of Patricia and Kenneth's neighbors, the ones who had lived next to them for years. They shared stories about the signs they had missed, the expensive vacations Patricia took while claiming the HOA was broke, the new truck Kenneth bought the same month his brother's company got a huge landscaping contract, the way they would shut down anyone who questioned anything at board meetings. We should have said something, one neighbor George told me. But it is easy to ignore things when they are not affecting you directly. I understood that. It was human nature to avoid conflict, to assume someone else would handle problems, to hope issues would resolve themselves. But problems rarely resolved themselves, especially when the people causing them had no incentive to stop. The Scottsdale community took note of my case. Other HOAs started implementing better oversight, having external audits, and creating term limits for board members. The Arizona legislature passed a bill requiring annual financial disclosures and making it easier for homeowners to access HOA records. It was not a huge reform, but it was progress. Jennifer Sanchez, the reporter who had covered the story, did a one-year follow-up segment. She interviewed me, Sandra, and a representative from the Arizona Department of Real Estate. The segment focused on HOA reform and used my case as the jumping-off point for a broader discussion about accountability in community associations. You have any regrets? Jennifer asked me during the interview. I regret that it had to get so complicated, I said. I wish Patricia and Kenneth had just followed the rules from the beginning. I wish they had asked permission before using my driveway. I wish they had not stolen from the community. But do I regret standing up to them? No. The segment ended with a shot of my driveway, empty and peaceful in the afternoon sun, while Jennifer's voiceover talked about the importance of ordinary people standing up for their rights. Life continued in its ordinary way after that. I kept working, kept maintaining my house, kept living in Saguaro Ridge. Lisa moved in after we had been dating for about a year. She loved the house, loved the neighborhood, and loved the story even though she pretended to roll her eyes whenever someone brought it up at parties. "Here we go, the driveway saga again," she would say, but she would smile while saying it. We even hosted an HOA meeting once, the annual summer barbecue planning session. About a dozen people showed up, parking on the street and in my driveway with permission. We sat in my living room, the same space that had witnessed so much conflict during my hearings years before, and planned fireworks and food vendors and a DJ for the community party. It was surreal and healing in equal measure. The community barbecue that year was great. Huge turnout, good food, fireworks that actually went off correctly. At one point, Sandra pulled me aside. "You know, this all started with your driveway fight, all of it. The reforms, the new board, the accountability. It was a catalyst." "I just wanted them to stop parking there," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "I know. But you started something bigger. Sometimes that is how change happens. Someone says no to something small and it cracks open something larger." I looked around at the neighborhood gathered together. Kids running around, people laughing and talking, no underlying fear of arbitrary violations or corrupt leadership. It was the community we should have had from the beginning. Patricia's legacy was the reforms she accidentally caused by being so thoroughly corrupt and vindictive. Kenneth's legacy was stricter contracting rules and oversight. Together, they had taught an entire community about the importance of accountability. As for my legacy, I was the driveway guy. The person who said no when everyone expected me to just go along. The stubborn guy who hired a lawyer over parking. The catalyst for exposing corruption. I was okay with that. Years passed. Lisa and I got married. We talked about moving, about getting a bigger house, about maybe leaving the HOA life behind. But we stayed. Saguaro Ridge was home now, and it was a good home because we had fought to make it that way. My driveway remained mine, used only by the people I chose to allow. It was a simple thing, really. A basic property right that should never have been controversial, but it had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that standing up mattered, that your voice mattered, that saying no to abuse of power mattered. Sometimes I would see that little private driveway sign and remember the white Honda, the retaliation notices, the boot on my truck, Patricia's icy smile, the courthouse steps, Detective Hayes's handcuffs clicking closed. It all felt like a lifetime ago and yesterday simultaneously. The desert sunset painted my house pink and gold as I stood in my driveway one evening, exactly 5 years after I first noticed the unauthorized parking. Lisa came out to join me, handing me a beer. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How much has changed?" I said. "And how it all started with something so small." "Your driveway is not small," she joked. "It is actually pretty spacious. That is what started this whole thing." I laughed. She was right. My conveniently wide, easily accessible driveway had been too tempting for Patricia to resist. And my unwillingness to just accept unauthorized use had cascaded into exposing corruption, reforming an HOA, and changing community association laws across Arizona. "You think Patricia ever thinks about it?" Lisa asked. "How different things would be if she had just asked permission." "Probably," I said, "but people like Patricia do not think they need permission. That was the whole problem." We stood there in the driveway, our driveway, as the desert cooled and stars started appearing. Somewhere in the neighborhood, kids were playing. Somewhere else, someone was having dinner. The community was alive and functioning and healthy. And my driveway was empty except for us, exactly as it should be. It was never just about a driveway. It was about respect, rights, and the kind of community worth fighting for. It was about ordinary people standing up to institutional abuse. It was about the small acts of resistance that sometimes crack open larger change. But it started with a driveway. My driveway. And I would do it all again, every frustrating, expensive, stressful moment of it, because some things are worth fighting for, even if it is just about where people park.